Welcome to another episode of Philosophy and Critical Thinking. This episode is about Chapter 2 from William Irvine's book on desire. The chapter is called Other People. Before getting into the details of Chapter 2 from this book, I figured it'd be worth just stating what exactly the book is about. Right? So it's called On Desire, and in it, William Irvine is asking questions like, well, what are desires? Where do they come from? Should we let them govern our conduct? So if we find ourselves wanting something, should we try and acquire this thing that we want? This second chapter in the book is concerned specifically with the question, why do we want what we want? And Irvine's main idea is that desires for material things, desires for fancy car, a big house, nice jewelry, fancy sneakers, these material desires are really social desires in disguise. So what Irvine means by that is that when we find ourselves wanting material things, what we're really after is other people's admiration or recognition or respect, or the social feedback that we get from them when they notice that we have nice things. So that's his main idea. All right, why does he think that other people can have this profound influence in shaping our desires? Irvine notices that we seek things like admiration and respect and recognition from other people, and this is often due to our own insecurity. We can want to have a social status. This desire for social status can lead us to pursue things like fame. And the desire to be famous isn't necessarily a desire to be some kind of Hollywood celebrity where millions of people around the world love you. You could want to be famous within your own social circle. You can want maybe 10 or 20 other people who you view to be in your in-group to give you respect, recognition, and admiration. So the desire for social status does not have to be a kind of desire that motivates us to seek celebrity status. Wanting fame within a small social circle, that is itself a kind of social desire. All right, some other social desires that Irvine notices humans typically have. We sometimes want to generate negative feelings in others. We sometimes want to make others envious of us. We sometimes enjoy the suffering of our opponents. We want to dominate them. Right? So you can imagine an athlete who gets a victory and they enjoy winning, but in addition to winning, they also enjoy seeing their opponent lose. There's a German word for this. It's called Schadenfreude. And Schadenfreude is a kind of joy in other people's misfortune. Or you could think about young children. They sometimes tease younger siblings. They seem to enjoy it when their younger siblings are frustrated. Right? So these desires to generate negative feelings in others, these are what we might call negative social desires. As an extreme example of a negative social desire, Irvine mentions mass murderers. And he says you might think that a mass murderer is someone who doesn't need other people, who doesn't care about other people, and that's why they kill others. But Irvine says, no, they kill because they need acknowledgement and attention or other people to recognize them. That's what they are really after. And if they've been deprived of that, then they might become mass murderers because they think that's the only way they can get other people's attention. They can get other people to fear them, even if it's just in the moment of the murder. But it's this deep need to be acknowledged by other people that motivates a mass murderer to commit heinous crimes, at least according to Irvine. One important quotation from this chapter occurs on page 39. Irvine says, "We go to far less trouble making ourselves happy than appearing to be so. So here, I think it's useful to think about the kinds of behaviors that have become quite common on social media, where millions of people have become social media connoisseurs that carefully curate their public image. I'm talking about people who are posting photographs of themselves and updates about their life that really present them in a really positive light. So they don't post photos of their bad hair day. They post photos to make them look beautiful, and they're posting updates about how they just got back from the Bahamas and they had a relaxing week. What would be the point of making posts like this on social media if not to make other people, in a way, envious or jealous? And doesn't it take a lot of time and energy to meticulously curate a public image on social media? Irvine's approach to thinking about social desires in this chapter suggests that these behaviors really just cultivate vanity, and they can strengthen our desires to be validated by other people. All right, so clearly social desires have a huge impact on our behavior. What about materialism? So we live in a culture where materialism is rampant, and by materialism here, we're talking about desires for material things like cars and houses and jewelry and nice clothes. Irvine entertains a thought experiment to try to prove his point here that material desires are really just social desires in disguise. Here's the thought experiment. He asks us to imagine what would happen if everyone else vanished and it was just you, without anyone to impress. Why want a big house or a luxury car or expensive jewelry? Why care about putting on makeup or doing your hair? If there were no other people around to impress, would there be any reason at all to want material things, to care about one's appearance? And Irvine thinks that the answer is no. If there were no other people around to impress, you might live in a smaller structure that's easier to maintain. You might shower once a week on Friday, whether you need it or not, but there seems to be no reason at all to care about wearing makeup or designing one's hair, wearing fancy clothes, if there's no one around to impress. Right? So Irvine thinks that the thought experiment shows that the reason we want material things is to gain the recognition, respect, and admiration of other people. He says to finance our image projection activities, we might spend our adult life working at a job we hate. So in a way, these material desires can make us miserable. Another useful example that Irvine discusses is the salary example. So in the salary example, we're asked to imagine that a list of salaries for everyone who works at this particular business gets posted, and everyone sees the salaries. And you just imagine that you are one of the workers, and you notice that your salary is very close to the bottom, relatively speaking. And this makes you feel very sad. You feel underappreciated by your boss. And then what happens? Well, then you receive an email from the boss, and the boss says, somebody posted this fake list of salaries. These weren't the correct salaries. And so in order to dispel any confusion, I am going to post the accurate salaries just this one time. And so he does that, and you look at the list and you notice that you're close to the top. So relatively speaking, you're making more than everyone else in the office, or almost everyone else in the office. And this makes you feel elated. So what's the point of this salary example? Irvine thinks that we can learn from an example like this, that what really matters is what he calls positional value rather than absolute value. The same salary can bring you either joy or misery, depending on how it compares to your coworkers' salaries. Right, so you care more about not the absolute value of the salary, but the positional value of the salary with respect to other people that you're working with. Right? There seems to be a lot of wisdom in this point. I think about billionaire competition. If you already have $1 billion, why care about making more money? Well, the rich care more about being richer than others, not just being rich. Right? That's not to say that every rich person is like this, but billionaire competition is very real. The positional value attached to being a billionaire can motivate a person to work really hard to try and accrue more and more wealth. Because what matters isn't necessarily the absolute value of all the money one has, but rather, being the richest person in the world, or being in the top 10 or the top 100. And if you're number 101, maybe that's not good enough. You have to break into the top 100 wealthiest people in the world. Or think about, you at your job. Imagine that you work somewhere. I don't know, let's just say you work at Jersey Mike's, and you notice that a person who got hired more recently than you got hired, so you've been there 2 years and they just got hired, they're making more than you, right? Even though they do the same work. Wouldn't this make you upset? Wouldn't it make you significantly more upset to realize that than it would be to realize that Jeff Bezos has billions of dollars that you don't? We don't seem to envy billionaires all that much. We envy coworkers who have slightly higher salaries or have, slightly nicer offices. Some final reflections from Irvine. His idea is that our desires control us. We don't control them. And so we need to understand the origins of our desires if we want to have any kind of freedom or control over our own lives. In another part of this book, Irvine talks about what he calls hedonic adaptation, which is a well-studied phenomenon in psychology. Hedonic adaptation is basically when you satisfy a desire that you have, it's not like you suddenly become happy in this long-term way that you've gotten what it is that you wanted, but rather your desires just adapt, right? You find yourself wanting new things. So suppose that you really want an intimate relationship with another person, and then you get it. You might initially feel really happy about this, but then over time, do you continue to feel happy about it, or do you start desiring other people, right? Well, it's quite common for people to fall in love, and then a few months or a few years go by, and then they break up and they get with someone else, right? Because our desires adapt. Or if you want the latest, greatest Cybertruck, and then you get the Cybertruck, you take it to H-E-B to get some groceries, somebody accidentally backs into it or pushes a grocery cart into it, and now it's got this dent on the side. A few months might go by, and you might start to resent the fact that your Cybertruck isn't the latest, greatest, brand new one anymore. And so you want a new one. A child who receives lots of presents on their birthday might be elated after they open up all of their gifts, but then the next day rolls around and they feel bored. They don't want to play with these toys that they just got. Their desires adapt. Right? So this is what can be called a hedonic treadmill. We get on this treadmill and we just keep running, right, without going anywhere at all. Right? New desires will bubble up inside of us once we've satisfied the old ones. So what should we do in light of this? Should we continue to try and strive for whatever we want, knowing full well that once we get it, we're just going to want new things? Or should we try to get off the desire treadmill? Should we try to take some ownership over desire formation? Maybe start trying to pursue things that we think are genuinely worthwhile rather than are things that we just find ourselves wanting? So these kinds of, ethical questions, these are the questions that Irvine is really trying to get us to ask and think about in a deep way.